Hi Ron, I am Sasha. I'm Devrel from Boundless. Very nice to be with you today. Thanks for panelists for making out. I know the traffic is a bit brutal today. For all you Koreans who just didn't expect Seoul to be so big, like events looks like it's nearby and it's definitely not. So cool, we're talking about DeFi today. Oh My DeFi is a great placeholder name because I want to focus on something much worse. So let's talk about Oh My DeFi. To get started today, just have some introductions. So please, Tristan, and then please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Tristan. I'm the co-founder of Bullet. We are a perpetuals exchange and layer 2 on Solana. We focus very much on building the kind of uncompromising exchange, so having the best of performance as well as verifiability and transparency. And I guess our biggest draw card is we're built on Sovereign SDK and we're able to get trade execution on our perp stacks down to 1 millisecond.
Hey everyone, happy to be here. I'm Ryan, I'm head of APAC for Offchain Labs. Offchain Labs, we're the initial developers of Arbitrum. Been with the team for about 2.5 years, covering different verticals across RWA, stablecoins, and DeFi in Asia as well. So super happy to be here.
Cool. I guess I'll introduce myself as well. I feel like moderators probably should introduce themselves too. I work at Boundless. Previously, we spun off from Risk Zero. You know Risk Zero. We were doing ZKVMs, so we work a lot in the ZK space. I'm a DevRel, so do stuff like this, write a lot of apps. Yeah. So I've got a few questions here, but we can keep it easy. If you want to talk about something else, please let me know. The first question is, what got you into DeFi and what are you working on right now? Obviously, you've already started with that. I actually have a quick question. Is Zeta Markets, was that what you were before?
Yeah, that's right. So we were quite an early team to Solana. We came through the second ever Solana hackathon back in early 2021, I think like April. That's when I went basically full-time in crypto. I decided to just get into the hackathon. I basically slept on my co-founder's couch for a couple of weeks and we pumped out what was like a binary options exchange. And we ended up winning that hackathon out of 10,000 teams, and then Jump Trading ended up giving us a bunch of money, which was pretty cool. And then I kind of went full-time from there, and we've been building the Solana ecosystem for 4 years essentially at that point. And then, Solana went through the lows with FTX. We kind of grinded through that, really spent a lot of time rethinking a lot of our architecture, and then kind of came back through that. Last year was pretty good. We scaled to over 100,000 users, $15 billion of volume, but ran into some kind of technical scaling challenges in terms of perp sexes need the cutting edge of performance. Essentially, they need to be able to have a lot of block space. They need to be able to have more discretion around how transactions are ordered, for example, to mitigate MEV and toxic flow. And so that kind of led us more down the modular roadmap.
Yep, so for us, we're focused on Arbitrum as a platform, and what I mean by that is with Arbitrum, we have one of the top 5 successful public chains for DeFi economic activity, but also an environment for developers to spin up their own blockchain, like what you guys are doing. So with the Arbitrum Orbit stack as well, we've seen some of the leading fintechs, launch such as Robinhood, launch tokenized equities, get onto the public chain first, figure out what works, what doesn't, experiment quickly, but also eventually migrate to a more regulatory compliant manner through their own stack. And some of the considerations for teams when they launch their own chain is around block space, also owning the economics. So if you are building on a public chain, some perp dexes might feel like you are always a renter, you're always paying some of these fees to the L2, you're paying it to the L1. But when you have your own chain, you can actually manage how you order the transaction. At least in the L2 space, you control the sequencer. We have products such as Time Boost, which is a transaction ordering policy that allows you to pay for a priority fee for your transactions to be included further ahead in the block. So yeah, there are these customization that can happen on the Orbit stack and as well as the public chain, and we're trying to build the best platform for teams to experiment and deploy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, one of my questions I had was about fragmentation of chains. We have 8 billion chains today. We'll probably have another 8 billion. It's probably increasing exponentially. I guess you kind of answered my question there a little bit. Is some users of chains have very specific requirements, and they need their own chain. My original question, maybe you already answered this, but interesting to hear what you said. Is this actually a problem to have 8 billion chains? People always say it's a problem. That's what I hear. Will better tech solve this issue, or maybe it's the other way around? Is it because we have better tech, we have 8 billion chains?
Yeah, good question. I mean, my background has always been in monolithic, so that's kind of what I grew up on. And I really liked it. That was like my magic moment with Solana when I could just get on there, get a bunch of USDC, send like cross-border transactions with like fraction of a cent fees, take my money, put it in like a lending market, trade it on Serum or something or other back in the day. I was like, this is great. Like, I don't have to muck around, and the fees were very low, you know, because I'd been mucking around with Ethereum DeFi prior to that, and everything was very expensive, slow. The feedback loop was kind of difficult, and then I guess at that time, like I guess Arbitrum and Optimism were actually just kind of coming out. I remember talking to, I think it was like Ed way back in the day, and so it was kind of funny. But then using some of these chains, I mean, it was obviously like a big improvement over Ethereum, but having to like bridge and the whole, you know, interop kind of thing seemed like, at least from a Solana maxi perspective, is like you're kind of breaking down the whole state machine, you're getting fragmentation. So largely, I like do really like that composability aspect. Looking at products like Jupyter, which I use basically every day, it's like beautiful that it composes with 20 different AMMs. You can kind of swap multiple routes. Yeah, it's like really good, and I think that's a big draw card. For us, it's been hard. I mean, maybe Solana gets there at some point, although I think it's just kind of like this trade-off. If you're a general purpose chain, you can't customize and make some of these like very difficult decisions. And I've definitely like raised those to, you know, for example, Anatoly back in the day, being like, you know, we need to get liquidity on there. We need clubs to really work on chain, and they've worked to a certain degree. Like, we've done a bunch of volume, and like Serum was kind of the POC for that back in the day. But if you want to be competitive with the top perps dexes right now, like, you got to just look at what's happening. Like Hyperliquid, Lida, Asta, Edgex, all these guys are building their own chains. They're all customizing the hell out of it, and that's clearly like the way to go, you know, at the moment. And so I guess back to your point, yeah, like bridging and interoperability and fragmentation of liquidity, definitely very annoying. Like, I just finished writing our bridge integration. It was kind of like a bit of a pain, but we got it done, and it's just like an extra hop for people to do. We are trying to abstract it as much out of our interface as possible. Like, if you've used some of these like more hybrid type dexes, for example, like Asta recently everyone was talking about, cross-chain deposits. I think it is kind of centralized, but you can kind of access it from any chain. We've been trying to do a similar thing where it's like, if you're on Solana depositing into our exchange, we kind of don't even call it bridging anymore. We're just like deposit, and it takes 20 seconds, you know, and people just, you know, we try and make it feel more like a native experience. But unfortunately, we can't compose natively our liquidity with what's happening on the L1. My caveat to that is perps exchanges can't really compose super well from what I can tell and what I've kind of built in the space. Spot is nice, you tokenize things, you take your LP position and you can kind of put it in some other place. It's very hard in the perp side of things because there's risk in the system. You can get liquidated, so essentially the smart contract needs to always be able to like claw back that collateral in a sense. So no one's found a way to just go and take a perps position, tokenize it, throw it off to another chain, do something. I know Tarun has been doing a bunch of work on like ZK margin calls almost, so you can do stuff like cross-chain, but this is like very early days, and I'm pretty excited to see what people will cook up.
Yep. For us, you know, we came up with the Arbitrum Orbit stack. You know, there was a time, I think early 2023, alongside OP stack. And one of the concerns from teams is also chain fragmentation, liquidity fragmentation. I think what we have strived to do is how do we build Arbitrum, the public chain, to have the deepest liquidity. I think today we have about 20 billion in TVL, and of this 20 billion, 9 billion, I think 9.3 is in stable coins. So how do you have these useful liquidity that can then be easily bridged across different chains within the ecosystem? One thing our research team worked on, so Ed, was around the concept of chain clusters. So yes, there have been talks around like aggregating all the liquidity across different orbit chains. But it might not make sense for the liquidity of like a perp DEX to be used or commingled with the liquidity in like a gaming chain or consumer chain. So by having some of these trustless assumption between chains that are within the similar verticals settle quickly among each other in an antitrust manner, I think that's one way. And the other is a product we just launched yesterday, which is embedded widget for bridge. So today, perp DEXs on like Arbitrum on a public chain, they are able to source for liquidity by embedding an iframe into their front end to source for liquidity, not only within the Arbitrum chains, but across EVM, and eventually will expand across like multi-chain as well, so non-EVM environments, and that's the end goal. The goal is if a user wants to get their funds from Solana to use on Arbitrum or from Arbitrum to Solana, we want to empower that. I don't think it's in our best interest to build up this friction. I think what we want to do is build an environment whereby users enjoy using Arbitrum, and it's an environment whereby they can hold their assets and source for different opportunities across the ecosystem.
Okay, so what we're hearing is that a lot of smart people are making a lot of smart UX. I guess you wouldn't call it hacks, but ways of making things a bit more straightforward. You gotta wait 20 seconds, at least you can make that 20 seconds a nice experience,
Yeah, it's a good thing about your L1 actually having pretty fast finality is like on Ethereum it takes 15 minutes to finalize, so that bridge experience I think is like somewhat painful for me, but the nice thing is like Solana finalizes within 12 seconds, and so we can kind of get it as close as possible to that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you said shake lessons, it's a shame that Polkadot and Cosmos didn't kick off. All right, next question. I think you mentioned Hyperliquid. I will say that my DeFi experience is pretty much linked to Solana actually. I did do some back in the day, but it was just so prohibitively expensive with gas that as soon as the Jupiters and the whatnots were all kicking off, I was very excited about that. So I will say that I do not know much of Hyperliquid in the high levels, but I hear Hyperliquid this, Hyperliquid that, everyone mentions it. Now I know there's like other ones like Astra and so on. The interesting question that I would like to answer personally is, what did Hyperliquid do right? But that's probably been answered already a lot. More interestingly, what did Hyperliquid do wrong that you can learn from in your own work?
It's a really good question. I mean, they did a lot of things right. I think one was just taking kind of like a uncompromising view on like building the best possible product. And I think that was only possible by them doing their own L1. I don't remember the backstory exactly. I think I've remember listening to a podcast from Jeff, but I think they kind of originated probably as an Orbit chain or on Arbitrum, and then...
No, they were just using Arbitrum public chain as like a bridge.
Okay. I see. So it was always a bridge. But then they, very much became their own L1. I think that was always kind of like a kind of hidden thing for them. They were kind of their own chain. I never knew like what chain it was built on in the early days. But it was good because, you can kind of very much customize what you want to do, and they came out with a good experience. And having built a perps exchange, it is very important to get liquidity. So I think that is like the key thing that they got right off the bat. Some people go out there and they just like churn a bunch of volume, but then you actually go to trade on there and like the spreads are like really wide and like no retail wants to go in there and actually trade. It just feels like you're losing money, and it's like, okay, I'm just going back to Binance at this point. So they focused on a lot of really good stuff there in terms of like the vault provided a bunch of the early liquidity. They had a bunch of markets listed quickly, kind of the FTX playbook. They added this like cancel prioritization, which is kind of this application specific sequencing or the block building where maker orders go before taker orders. It's kind of what people have been talking about a bunch. It means that like if prices move, the makers kind of are able to change and update their quotes without getting sniped all the time. And we had a lot of feedback from market makers who wanted similar protections essentially. You see this happening a bit in traditional markets, like people try and give faster links essentially to market makers to give them like a slight advantage so they can provide really deep liquidity. And so it's not all just like arbitrage. So there's some really good things that they did. I think they were also like very much community driven. I think like some projects struggle with that, some do better at that, but that obviously won them a loyal follower base. In terms of the negatives, I think one thing is like holding them back a bit now, which we've been working a lot on, is like what we call our like multi-asset collateral system. So right now you can only take USDC and put it in there and trade using that. That was how our old platform actually worked as well, and it was our most complained about feature because everyone's like, I'm a Solana bull, I don't want to liquidate my Solana into USDC, then put it in the platform and then long Solana. They're like, I just want to put the Solana in there and long it. And that's actually a very complex thing to build. Like Binance and Bybit have built it over like many years. Took us like probably 3 months to like build an equivalent system. And we couldn't have done that if it was on like a L1 smart contract, just because there's like a lot of compute that needs to be done. And you need to like basically have a borrow lend in the background, like margin all these different assets. Like the margin engine is like arguably the most complicated part of a perps exchange, very hard to get right. So Hyperliquid, I think, took the approach of going simpler, getting to market, and I think now they're trying to like back solve that, get a team to kind of figure out how to build that. I think it's quite a nice feature because you can do stuff like basis trades, which is like shorting the perp and like longing spot, kind of how Athena works and gets all its yield. So you can actually do that natively on our exchange without getting liquidated, which is really nice. So I think it's a feature a lot of people liked. And then probably the other one that I've heard a lot of people, like Hyperliquid doesn't have too many complaints, but one is probably the bridging, especially coming from the Solana crowd. People are like, I don't really want to like move out to another chain. Before Hyperunit, I think it was also kind of jank because they like wrote their own bridge contract. And so I think that was a friction point for a lot of people, but regardless, they got, I don't know how many billions of TVL now. So like clearly, if the product's good enough, people would come there. And then maybe my personal opinion is like, I feel like Hyper EVM is like, it's been decent, but I think I went to the meetup a couple of days ago, and I think there's definitely some rough edges. I don't think, they've been a bit slow in growing the ecosystem and like dedicating a lot of resources, but I understand they're only like a small team. And then, I also believe in like SVM is much more performant. That's why you guys are adopting Rust as well, with some of the, what's it called again?
Stylus.
Yeah, Stylus, that's right. So, I think maybe, I don't know, we'll see if the EVM was a good or bad choice there.
Yeah, and on the Stylus point, just want to share, Stylus is essentially we view EVM as the floor, not the ceiling. So with Stylus, we enable developers to build in other languages like Rust, C, C++, which is much more performant. And it also helps lending institutions or fintechs because chances are that their developer teams are building in Rust, C, C++ instead of Solidity. So that's one of the feedback we've heard. On the Hyperliquid question, I think what they've done well in the very early days, I remember, is being able to open markets for maybe, I would say, alts or illiquid assets, and that has been like the main challenge for a lot of like early stage teams when they get to like certain volumes and they want to expand. So they have great DEX liquidity, they have venues across lending, borrowing, and when they want to expand to perps, the traditional perp DEXs back in the days took a long time to integrate a new market. Part of the reason is systemic risk. They are unable to manage the risk. But yeah, I think the Hyperliquid team did that really well, and they capitalized from some of these meme coins as well, like Melania, Trump, for example. What I think they could have done better, and also back to the Hyper EVM, is it is difficult to bootstrap your own chain from scratch. That's why that's why you guys are building with like SVM, and that's why we have the Orbit stack. And some of the challenges is also on the tooling. So when you have developers building in your own environment, do you have the right Oracle providers? Do you have the right RPC providers? And a lot of these, groundwork have been laid out by some of the more, I would say, established ecosystem. So they've done the tooling, they've done the dirty work, the plumbing. And as a developer, you focus on what's the biggest problem. How do you onboard your users into your ecosystem instead of having to worry about, how am I going to get stablecoin liquidity? Is this stablecoin going to be native or bridge version? And I would say these nuances actually affect the overall developer experience.
It's an issue just when I have a developer experience. Even when we Boundless built on Basement and we have all these tools that everyone's used to, it still can be very difficult, right? So if you bootstrap your own chain with all those things that people aren't used to, can add a lot to it. I think we are coming up on time, and I think that's a good place to finish, but I'll just let you quickly both give me maybe 3 sentences on what gets you up in the morning to do work right now, what you're really excited about in DeFi or in Bullet in the arbitral space.
Good question. Yeah, I feel like it's a very exciting time to be a perps exchange, just because I think, like my thesis at least over the last couple of years is like things are going to move towards the DEX space, and that's why I've been working so hard and why I've been building for 4 years. But yeah, it's really good. It's good to see a lot of these like DEXs popping up and actually starting to do considerable volume and so much attention on them. So it just kind of feels validating. It feels like we're moving towards a more kind of transparent, financial future, where it's kind of users own more of that kind of stack and kind of benefit from that. Because I went through the FTX era, lost a bunch of money, got rugged, all this kind of stuff. So off the back of that, I was very much like, we need better tooling than this. So I'm excited. I'm getting up every day because we're pretty close to mainnet, and I've been working my ass off. So I'm like just keen to get out there, keen to like bootstrap some adoption, get people trading on it. And I think the fact that we're able to execute trades in like literal milliseconds, through our like unique real-time sequencer model, I think is going to be something that like we haven't seen so far in crypto, which is pretty cool. And I think a lot of people are touting like 100 milliblocks, 50 milliblocks, and then we smash it again with like 50 times that. So, I think it'll be really cool, and seeing how that more like mid-frequency, high-frequency trading stuff comes more to DeFi.
Very cool. For us, one motto we have is Arbitrum everywhere. So be it, you're building a DeFi, if it's a consumer, early stage experiment, want to build the right environment for you to be experimenting on Arbitrum, and if you're one of the largest like institutions, asset managers in the world as well, how do you tap into this liquidity? And we think a lot about the TradFi and DeFi composability as well. So aside from bringing all these RWAs on chain, how can they be better utilized in the broader DeFi ecosystem that we've built out over the past couple of years?
Alright, well, awesome. Thank you very much to the panelists, to Tristan from Wallet.xyz, and to Ryan from Offchain Labs. Right? Thank you very
Yeah,
much
thank
for
you.
the today.